Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Tex Sample. I'm the pastor of Trinity United Methodist Church. And this program is our program on reframing the dialogue on racism in America. Our teacher and coordinator is the Reverend Sam Mann, who you've met. This is our third session of this course. And Reverend Mann will be introducing our speaker for the evening. Reverend Dr. Mann.
Thank you, Brother Tex. It's good to see you, even though it's by the graces of cyberspace. I still ain't figured out if God is in cyberspace yet, because sometimes I can't find him. We are very, very fortunate tonight. I can't tell you how fortunate we are to have with us our guest speaker and our leader. But before we get to that, I just want to establish why we're here. For those there may be some here who haven't been in on the beginning. But reframing the dialogue on race in America is a project that was founded by the Reverend Mac Charles Jones, who was the Associate General Secretary of the National Council of Churches of Christ in New York City. And he was also once the pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church here in Kansas City, Missouri. As a member of the staff, as the Associate General Secretary of the National Council, he was there during the time of the burning of Black churches, and reframing the dialogue on race in America grew out of that time when there were a lot of young white men burning Black churches all over the United States. And Mac Jones decided that we needed to do something about that, and that we needed to do more than just catch the people, but we needed to be about the business of stopping what was causing it. And so we organized Reframing the Dialogue on Race in America. Now, last week I said this, and I'm going to say this, and then we'll get out the way. But reframing the dialogue is not about putting a new picture frame on race. It's about the structural frame. You know, the house has a frame that you have to build the house around. Well, a picture frame just is decorative, and it kind of sits around the picture, but the house frame has, not only does it have walls and roof, but it has the foundation in it. And so we decided that the race was being dealt with in a wrong-headed kind of way, and so we decided to establish a program, a national program, and we did. We got it funded through the National Council, and it had basically 4 points. The first, and we pulled together. It was designed for the white church to begin with, and then it expanded to include others. But the 4 points that we had were the failure of integration, inclusivity, and diversity as effective responses to racism. The failure, integration was a failure. It was always Black folks coming into a corrupt culture known as the white society. So we were going to, part of the reframing was to lift this up and to point this out. The second point was the need to write history from other race, gender, and class perspectives. In other words, the history lessons we were getting were lies. And then the third one was the damaging effects of racism on white folks. and therapy as a setting for healing this damage. And of course, the last one, the one we're going to begin to deal with tonight, is reparations. The damage has got to be repaired. These were the 4 points that we came up with as we set forward to go to our first conference, which was held in 1997, November of 1997, at the St. Paul School of Theology. We had about 40 preachers from all over, paid their way in, and we all met and began to deal with the failure of integration, the need to write history from other race, gender, and class perspectives, the damaging effects of racism on whites. And, if you go to the psychiatrist, you never hear a white person talk about one of the problems they got is if they're white. But somebody Black goes to a psychiatrist or a counselor, that's the first thing to say. I'm Black in America. That's the first problem. And then the last thing we brought in was the issue of reparations and the issue of repairing the damage that has been done. Tonight, we have a wonderful treat in store for us. Tonight, we are going to begin to deal with reparations. And this is laying the groundwork for hopefully a place where we can get to work here in Kansas City, because there's an effort here led by the local Kansas City Reparations Coalition. The male co-chair is Will Bowler, and the female co-chair is Justice Gadsden. And we are going to be here, we'll hear more about this next week. And there's this seminar ain't just a thoughtful seminar. It's something we're going to actually put some legs on, hopefully, the next week. And our speaker next week will be Brother Mickey Dean, who is a member of the local Buff chapter and a member of the local Kansas City Reparations Coalition. But I was looking at our speaker tonight. I was looking at his resume, and I decided I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this because this is too good for me to leave anything out. Now, it's not long, so just stay with me. Don't go to sleep. Kamm Howard, that's our speaker, is a Chicago businessman and real estate investor, and an internationally respected reparations activist. Internationally respected reparationist activist. He, by the way, spoke here at the annual Urban Summit meeting about 2 months ago. In 2014, he spoke at the 8th Pan-African Conference in Johannesburg, South Africa, and Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, on the new paradigm of reparations activism. He spoke there on the new paradigm of reparations activism. In 2016, he was a key organizer for the visit of the United Nations Working Group of Experts for People of African Descent that proclaimed that the U.S., that's the United States, must engage reparations. Kamm has been a 16-year member of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, called NCOBRA. In 2017, Kamm was elected as the national male co-chair. The national male co-chair in 2015 as a member of the National African American Reparations Commission, led a team to revise H.R. 40. We all know that's the bill in Congress at this very moment. the Federal Reparations Bill. Kamm recently authored a pamphlet entitled Laying the Foundation for Local Reparations, a guide for providing national symmetry for local reparations efforts. I'm gonna say that one more time because we need one of these, Kamm. Laying the Foundation for Local Reparations, a guide for providing national symmetry for local reparations effort. I'm sure Mickey Dean's got one. And in the June of 2020, Kamm successfully led work to pass the City of Chicago Subcommittee on Reparations. In addition, Kamm was selected to give testimony before the House Judiciary Committee on HR 40. That's the HR bill that's in the Congress in February of this year, and was elected to his third term as National Male Co-Chair. I want y'all to give Brother Kamm a wonderful Kansas City welcome, for he has come here by the way of cyberspace to speak to us tonight. And let me tell you something, group, we are indeed a fortunate group of people. Brother Kamm.
Thank you, Baba, Reverend Sam Mann. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak before you today. I have been a committed warrior in this movement for redress for people of African descent in America for a while, as my short bio stated, over 16 years now. And it's always a pleasure to carry forth this message. I want to thank also the people in Kansas City who brought me to your attention, specifically Mickey Dean and the members of the Black United Front and the Urban Summit that was held there, as well as the Urban League, who was also part of that summit. Thank you, thank them for bringing me to your attention. And it's my understanding that I did meet you, Reverend Mann, and also see the Reverend Pat was also in attendance there. And so I appreciate you thinking and feeling that what I stated then had merit and that it needed to be shared even wider. So I greatly appreciate it. So this reframing the dialogue on race is an excellent topic and subject that speaks to where we are in this country right now. We are certainly having a conversation about race, one that has not been held since the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War at this particular level. I mean, we've been talking about it, skirting around it, denying it, since that time. But the level of conversation around dealing with it from a standpoint of redress or reparations, this is the first time in over 150 years that the country has been engaged in this type of conversation at this particular level and energy all around the country. You find the issue of reparations as a front and center conversation. We have 2 bills in Congress, tons of media talk and articles and news programs are being generated on a daily basis. Universities are having classes on reparations. They're engaged in leading conferences and even some forms of redress, which is important to this movement at this time. Foundations have begun to put money in the area of reparations, something that, again, not since the days of abolition and coming out of enslavement has, the foundational sector, nonprofit, if you will, sector been so engaged. So this is a very high energy time, and not to mention all of the things that are going on around local reparations at this time. in cities and states around the country, in addition to the many allies that we have speaking to this issue. Japanese Americans, the Jewish Reformed Church, many other groups, and non-Black organizations have joined on to this issue of reparations on the side of Blacks and not in opposition, which is extremely important. Corporations have also joined in a way that we're seeing more and more come on. So the idea of reparations in America right now is one that needs to be and will be explored to some type of end in the very near future on the federal level, as we see it being done on the local levels, particularly in Evanston, Illinois. So I'm a member of NCOBRA. Let me first talk about NCOBRA for a second. NCOBRA is the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. We started in 1987. The mission, the sole purpose of NCOBRA is to win reparations for people of African descent in the United States. There are a lot of organizations at the time. There were a few organizations at that time, mostly Black nationalist organizations that had reparations as a platform, like the Black Panther Party, like the Nation of Islam, like the Republic of New Africa, and some others. They had reparations in their platform, but there was not a national organization that was solely determined to organize just for reparations. And NCOBRA was built at that time. And shortly after that, in 1989, Congressman Conyers introduced the first federal legislation bill dealing with reparations since Reconstruction. And that legislation was introduced as a result of one of our members going to his congressman, who was Congressman Conyers, and encouraging him to write the legislation. And that legislation was vetted by NCOBRA, and we've been, locked to the hip of that legislation since that time. In 1917, working with the National African American Reparations Commission, we revised HR 40. NCOBRA I was working for NCOBRA on the NARC Commission, and was asked to be the lead writer in the revision of the bill. Well, we revised the bill to make it not just a study bill. The original bill, and the language is similar, but the original bill was to study whether or not there was continued injury among current living Blacks from the periods of enslavement and Jim Crow primarily, and if there were to make recommendations to Congress. The new bill starts off with the notion that there is continued injury. We don't have to, at 1989, there was, wasn't as much research and scholarly, it was anecdotes, and there was, the genuine held belief in the Black community that there was continued injury, but it was not one that was even considered to be valid in the white community, mainstream community. So that was one of the things that it was designed to do. But since that time, there's been, tremendous amount of scholarly research to show that, there's continued legacy in a wide number of areas, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And so the new bill begins with the premise that there's continued injury and that Congress should study that history, study the degree in which the injury exists, and then have a duty to, or the commission would then have a duty to craft proposals to address that injury. So it's not just to study and say, we're gonna make recommendations, but it's to draft actual repair, to come up with a comprehensive plan of repair. And so that's been the new formation of the HR 40. And NCOBRA is definitely pushing that and working with Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, the new champion of the bill, sponsor of the bill today. But NCOBRA defines reparations as a process of repairing, healing, and restoring people who are injured due to their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights by a government, corporation, institution, or individual. And it's very important that we really look at that definition in all of its parts. And we start off by saying it's a process. It's not just one thing. It's not just a check and it's given and it's done and it's over. Or it's not just, 5 years of tuition-free education and then it's done and it's over. It's a process toward getting to repair. And in order to really flesh that out, we have to know what all the injury is to actually get to repair, to get to healing, to get to a restoration of a form of life or a quality of life, I should say, that is one that's on par with anyone living in America. So it's a process that we use to get to repair. And that's a series of actions and steps and concepts and plans, et cetera, proposals, policies, and projects. It's a process of getting to repair, healing, and restoration of a group. And these are not just individual-based claims, but group-based claims. It's claimed by all those who have been categorized in this country as Black, whose ancestors were robbed from the continent of Africa. They were forced to come here and create a new identity and ethnic group from which we have a subculture or a particular culture in America, one that that has benefited America, the Black subculture, in a whole lot of ways, So it's a redress for a group who was injured based on their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights. The right of life, the right to your labor, a right to your progeny, right to your children. Our children were stolen. Children were sold. Our children were automatically relegated to a life of enslavement. In the womb, they had a value on them, and that value was equated to how it would enrich the owner of the mother, the owner of the owner of the mother or the plantation. And so even in the womb, our people did not have the right to determine the direction and life that child would take. And so the fundamental human rights of life, employment, housing, these type of things were denied us. And they were denied us by, forcefully and violently denied us by the governments. And the governments was the federal government, state governments, and local governments, by corporations, railroads, banking institutions, insurance institutions, timber institutions, coal institutions, all those institutions, all those corporations, I should say, that was used to further and build out this country, were part and parcel of those harms that were done, those denial of the basic human rights that as a group we had deserved. Institutions like the educational institutions, like the religious institutions. For instance, we know that Harvard University, which is the #1 leading citadel in America, really regained its renown because it was able to attract students from around the world, also on this continent, to come and study medicine on what they call live cadavers. Now, if you're a cadaver, that means you're dead. How can you have live cadavers? Well, they were buying Africans off the ship who were dying of what was called the bloody flux, and they would buy them for $10, $15 and take them up to Harvard, and they would experiment on them before they died. And that is how Harvard University became built. But there was many other institutions, educational institutions in this country that were doing the same thing to attract, especially medical institutions, to attract students. So the educational institutions in this country, the founding educational institutions, Brown University was that family is one of the leading shipbuilders and who provided the ships to go to the continent of Africa and to extract Africans from the continent and bring them here. So, religious institutions, they justify the enslavement of Africans and all the atrocious treatment of Black people, saying that we were non-human, we didn't have a soul, and therefore these things could be done to us. And it was the religious institutions who gave the rationale and the logic for the atrocious behavior, immoral behavior that was done to African people for so long. And some of those beliefs still exist in some of the religious institutions of today. So we have governments, federal, state, and local. You have corporations. Many of those corporations are still here today. And if you know anything about corporate law, a corporation is a legal person that does not die until there's a resolution that says it's dissolved. So corporations live on indefinitely until it either dissolves legally or through bankruptcy or just dies. It's no longer in existence, but as long as it's in existence, it's still responsible for any actions that is done in any area of any context of this lifespan. And we know also legally that any corporation that buys a corporation, it not only buys its assets, but it also buys its liabilities. And so that's where we get into the area of predecessor corporations. And so you have corporations that have different names or started after enslavement, but they bought a corporation that was engaged in the crimes during enslavement. Well, they bought that predecessor's liabilities. And so they're still legally liable for the harms committed to Africans and the existing injuries that their descendants are experiencing today as a result of buying the assets of that corporation in the past. And then finally, after, in addition to governments, corporations, and institutions, you have prominent individuals, families who are still living off the wealth of their forefathers' crimes against Black people. And some of those families have profound, wealthy foundations, like in Chicago, one of the foundations, this slips my mind. These foundations are all over the place. The Mccormick Foundation. McCormick Foundation, many of you, you've been to Chicago and been to a trade center, you probably came to the McCormick Place, which is the largest, at one time was the largest expo center in America. But the McCormick family, very wealthy family still today in the Chicago area. I think last I heard there was about 11 mansions that the family owns in and around the Chicago area. But they got their wealth by a stolen invention on the plantations in Mississippi of an African, and monetized that invention and built a tremendous amount of wealth for the family. So when we talk about the definition of reparations, it speaks to so much just in understanding what it actually means. And again, it's a process of repairing, healing, and restoring people who were injured due to their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights by a government, corporation, institution, or individual. Even on the lower level, on a basic level, we say that reparations are any targeted resources for a particular injury that has resulted from those former crimes. Let me kind of go down. To talk about this new frame, when you talk about reframing the dialogue, to talk about this new frame, Reverend Mann mentioned in my bio that I had spoken Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as well as in Johannesburg, South Africa in 2014, on what I call the new paradigm of reparations activism. So new paradigm, new frame, is really, kind of the same thing. And my argument was that in 2001, there, as a result of actions by reparations activists globally, a new paradigm, there was a paradigm shift, a frame shift on this whole issue of reparations. And it happened in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism in Johannesburg, South Africa, in Durban, South Africa, I should say. And for those who may not know, that was the third global World Conference Against Racism. There have been 2 other World Conferences Against Racism held by the United Nations. The last one prior to the 2001 was in 1978. So it had been, 23 years prior since the last one. And that was during the Jimmy Carter administration. And so there were some activists in 1999 who went to Geneva from New York and met with some high officials there and said there needs to be a new World Conference Against Racism. And they were successful, some Black activists, and they were successful in getting the organ to begin to move in that direction. And then in 2000, they announced that there would be a World Conference Against Racism, and it would be held in South Africa in 2001. And once it was announced, Black people around the world, who were engaged in human rights work, began to activate, began to get organized around what are we going to go to the World Conference and demand, from New York or from America, from Canada, from England, from Jamaica, from Brazil. What are we going to, from Colombia? Many people don't know that, in America, there's about 50 million Blacks, people of African descent in America. In Brazil, there's over 100 million. America's the second largest, but even in Colombia, there's 20 million, 25 million. About half, we're about half as many as Brazil, and Colombia is about half as many as in America who speak Spanish, by the way. And Brazil, those in Brazil speak Portuguese and we speak English. All over 200 million of us who don't speak our native tongues. But that's another part of this discussion. But we didn't want to all go to South Africa without all of our own individual demands. And so it was agreed upon in South America, where there was a group meeting, that we would focus on 3 areas as a group. When we went to Durban, all of us would agree that 1, that slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, slavery and colonialism or apartheid, and later apartheid and the transatlantic slave trade and slavery were crimes against humanity. Later, apartheid and colonialism was also added, but they agreed that we would raise this up to crimes against humanity, just like the crime of genocide, the crime of torture. Crimes against humanity are the most egregious crimes that a government can commit or allow to be committed against the civilian population, a population that is not at war with it. And these crimes have no statute of limitations. So whenever they were enacted, once they have been labeled crimes against humanity, they can be brought before bodies to have them addressed or redressed. And so that was the first thing that we wanted. They wanted the whole entire system of robbing Africans from the continent, shipping them over here, this whole this tri-continental trade that was taking place, and along with the behaviors that were done once Africans got to this continent. We wanted all of those to be determined by the global community to have been crimes against humanity. The second thing was that from these crimes, there was an economic basis. These crimes were not committed because white people didn't like Black people. They were committed to enrich certain groups and nations of whites and subjugate and impoverish other groups, particularly people, Africans and African nations. And so we said that if you look at all of the wealthy nations in the world, most of them are Western, you'll find that all of those Western nations had some part in the transatlantic slave trade, some part in enslavement, some part in colonialism, some part in apartheid. And that is where their wealth originated, and that is how their wealth has continued to grow. And if you look at the poorest nations on the planet, or the poorest people on the planet, you'll find out that they were the victims of the transatlantic slave trade, the victims of enslavement, the descendant victims of colonialism, the descendant victims of apartheid. And so there was an economic basis. And so if you had these crimes and there was an economic basis to these crimes, then three, then reparations are due. And so they went to the United Nations, and America tried to get this language taken out before it went to Durban, but the language was kept in, it was debated. If you know that history, America walked out of the World Conference Against Racism. And however, out of the 195 countries at the time, I think it was only America and Israel walked out, and Canada and Australia abstained from voting, and the other 191 countries voted that this particular language will stay in the document and become the global standard. So that changed the whole trajectory of the reparations movement. It's established this new frame, this new paradigm, and that's what I argued in 2014, having saw what was taken place. And this new frame is: 1, crimes were committed; 2, injuries remain; and 3, repair is necessary. We call that reparations 1, 2, 3. Very simple: crimes were committed, injuries resulted and remain, repair is therefore necessary. And if you look in America's tort courts, tort law, if someone is injured from a crime, a violation, like someone runs a red light and you're injured and you're hurt by it, you know, you're obligated to repair that situation because you were at fault and an injury resulted, and thus you have to correct that injury. And it's the same thing on this global level of the crimes committed, the violations committed by nations and governments and people and corporations and institutions against people who they classify as racially Black. So when we talk about crimes, we talk about 3 periods of crimes and 3 categories of crimes. So the 3 periods of crimes we look at is the period of, in America, Black people who are fighting for redress from the American government. We look at the period of enslavement. In America, you know, if you talk about enslavement in Florida, it goes back to the 1500s. But if you look at the British beginning of enslavement on these shores, it would go to, and in Florida, it was the Spanish who set up enslavement in in Florida. And New Orleans and up the Mississippi, it was the French. But on the East Coast, north of Florida, along the East Coast, it was the British. Primarily, you had the Swedish also and the Dutch in what was now New York, but was New Amsterdam at that time. So you had, you start that period at 1619, and it lasted up until 1865. Legally, as we know, there's a movie that just came out last weekend, and I haven't watched it. I'm supposed to watch it. That looked at a family, a sister who's still alive, elder, who recently got out of enslavement. So we know it still exists, but legally it ended in 1865 at the end of the Civil War and the signing of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution. But that's one period of the crimes committed against Black people. And then there was a short period of Reconstruction that looked at repairing that. And then you had the next period, which we call apartheid, Jim Crow apartheid, from 1877 until 1965 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act. That pretty much legally ended so-called Jim Crow. We call it apartheid because apartheid means separate development. And if you look at some of the worst atrocities that happened in the world outside of America, for instance, the Jewish Holocaust and the apartheid regime in South Africa, both of these governments and states state that they pattern their sets of protocols and actions and structures, social structures after the Jim Crow apartheid structures here in America. And that Jim Crow, which we call apartheid because apartheid is a international legal term. It is also a crime against humanity. And we don't use Jim Crow because it really doesn't have any legal status. But we hyphenated Jim Crow apartheid so people would know we're talking about that period. Apartheid means separate development in the Afrikaans language. And that separate development is backed by force and violence. It is the pulling of resources out of a community and channeling those resources to another community like convict leasing, pulling out labor and utilizing that labor to enrich other communities, predominantly in this case, the white community. It's refusal to put resources in communities at the same rate. Yeah, we know they had this separate but equal, but that was overturned. That separate was not equal because you weren't putting the same amount of resources in the two racial communities. So separate development is, or apartheid is the second period. The third period is the post-apartheid period. Is the third period, right? So yeah, what happens from 1965, I should say, onto the present. So we look at mass incarceration. We look at the war with drugs on our community. We look at predatory lending. You can also look at the police terror, the many stages of police terror, because we know that the Black Panther Party was fighting against police terror. It was a Black Panther Party of self-defense, and we would defend our communities from police terror. That was in the 70s. It grew up in the 1969 and 70s. In 1987, we know that there was a torture cabal in Chicago among the police, that they were subsequently, the leader, John Burge, was convicted not of the torture, but of lying, of perjury about the torture. And about 5 years ago, some of the torture victims received reparations. So and we look at the amount of daily, at one time daily, videos of police encounters with Blacks that resulted in summary executions, meaning that they were executed without any type of due process, any type of criminal, any type of legal process to first declare that they were guilty, charge them of a crime. Many of these, they were not even charged of a crime, had not committed crimes, were not tried for crimes, not convicted of crimes, but yet they were executed. And we call that summary executions. And George Floyd was one of those latest ones, victims. And so, so those are the three periods of crimes. When we say that we've experienced crimes against humanity in this country for 400 years, it's not an exaggeration, it's an actual fact. There was a period of enslavement, crimes against humanity. There was a period of apartheid, crimes against humanity. This period also has is marked by atrocious crimes that are sanctioned, or at least not, and in many cases not punished by the government in violation of our fundamental human rights. So, so when we say 400 years, we mean 400 years. These crimes can be looked at or can be framed within 3 categories in each of these periods. One is genocide. Genocide does not mean in every case, it's like 6 components of genocide, 6 points in the Genocide Convention. One is killing people in whole, like what was done to many of the Jews in Germany. But it also means killing in whole. The definition is killing in whole or in part. So when you see a large amount of deaths among a group, that could be genocide if it's government sanctioned. And we know that under enslavement, our life expectancy was a lot lower as a result of the crimes that were committed. And people were just killed outright, for a lot of reasons, running from enslavement, disobeying a master. So that's killing in part. That's part of the genocide. Again, denial of the life of the people without any process in which they were adjudicated to have committed a crime deserving of death, deserving of the death penalty. And so genocide is also causing severe mental bodily harm. It doesn't have to result in death, but it can result in mental harm. When you look at the life expectancy of Blacks in this country, is shorter than whites. In Chicago, it's over 25 years shorter, Black men, white men life expectancy. Maternal mortality rates higher for Black women than white women. Infant mortality rates higher for Black women than white women. Mental illness and suicide attempts higher for Black children, teenagers, way higher. You see in Chicago, it was a 87% increase from 2019 to 2020 among Black teenagers, and among white teenagers in the same city, it was a 15% decrease. So 87% increase 1 year, from 1 year to the next in the Black community, and a 15% decrease among whites in the same city. So these are evidence of genocide, where you have this divergence of life, the lifespan or the ability to live in America. So you find that in the period of enslavement, you find genocide in the period of Jim Crow, and you find genocide in current Black America, or current America among Blacks. The second category is that of plunder. Plunder is the extraction of economic resources from a community and channeling those resources to another. I talked about the intellectual property that was stolen from Blacks during enslavement, tons of inventions. But most what was extracted was our labor, our physical labor, plundered. Coming out of enslavement, we had bought 11 million acres of land in the first 30, 40 years after enslavement. Now there's only 1 million acres in the hands of Blacks at this time, just plundered. All type of bogus schemes were, and not even schemes, people were just literally ran off their land by white mobs and just fled and never came back. Plunder, plunder, plunder. The predatory lending scheme of 2007 or 2012, plunder. 60% of Black wealth left our community in that 5-year period. At the time of 2007, we had $300 billion in wealth, Black people. It should have been 300 trillion, it should have been 10 times that amount, 3 trillion, 20 times that amount if it wasn't for the other periods of plunder. But we had $300 billion worth of wealth. from 2007 to 2012, we lost over close to 190 billion, 60% stripped from our community. So we have these periods of these categories of plunder. And the third one is apartheid, is the separate development I talked about. Anywhere you see disparities in health, disparities in education, disparities, any area where you see disparities, you're going to find that it's a result of separate development, a disproportionate channeling of resources to whites and a lower channeling of resources, or a restriction of resources, or even a removal of resources from Black communities in those areas, in the areas of education, in areas of health, et cetera, et cetera. And then that gets us to the injuries. We can lay out the crimes. I mean, every day we're finding, different expressions of how Blacks were treated, the crimes that were treated against us. And when you look at, examine things on the local level, you'll find, you'll find evidence of genocide, evidence of plunder, and you'll find evidence of apartheid. And those crimes have resulted in injuries. And in COBRA, and COBRA talks about the 5 injury areas, the minimum areas in which redress should be targeted. And those areas are economic, wealth, and poverty. It's not just, bridging the wealth gap, because that's one, but just the retooling of Black America to compete in a job market that requires certain skills, and those skills have been systematically restricted from Blacks acquiring because the educational system doesn't provide us with the ability to acquire the necessary skills at the same level as others to compete for jobs. So we're locked out of a number of jobs. So the employment picture has to be looked at, and the business picture, or business ownership picture, has to be looked at when you talk about the crime, the injury area of economics, in addition to just wealth. Another injury area is education. Again, I talked about the inability to compete globally or even nationally because the education of Blacks is dismal, and it does not qualify. Black children, even when they graduate from high school and go to college, many of the dropout rate is so high because they're not even prepared to be in college. They're not even prepared to participate in the academic load because they haven't been prepared. In Chicago, we have an 87% failure rate to educate Black children. And what do I mean by that? Only 13% of Black youth who graduate from high school have a 12th grade reading or math level, read at the 12th grade level. Only 13%. Meaning that they weren't educated. 13%. So we have an 87% failure rate in the city of Chicago to educate Black youth. So that has to be addressed. And everything that happens before they even get to 12th grade, has to be addressed. The third injury area is health. And COBRA just released a report entitled The Harms to Our Genes, Transgenerational Epigenetic Inheritance, and Systemic Racism in America. And basically what that report does is looks at the new science that exists that shows that historical trauma can chemically affect a portion of your gene that causes it to either turn on or turn off in ways that it shouldn't, which results in compromised immune system, premature aging, developments of cancer, et cetera. And not only does this gene become affected in that manner, that effect is passed down transgenerationally, which means three and plus generations. And so when you go through the historical trauma of enslavement, that epigenome was altered, and people born 5 generations from there could still be affected by that particular gene, but that gene alteration, but they're experiencing their own historical trauma on top of that historical trauma. So that's passed down 3, 4, 5 generations. And then that generation, and each of those generations experienced historical trauma, genocide, apartheid, plunder. And so when you look at the health profile of Black people, you have to look at it from a standpoint of historical trauma, a standpoint of crimes committed against us for 400 years. So that's one particular area. So economics, education, health, our peoplehood. As I started off saying that, you know, you have 100 million people of African descent in Brazil and 50 million here in America and 20 million in Colombia. That's 170 million just in those three countries. And none of us speak our language, our native tongues. You know, none of us can tell you who our gods were, who our ancestral heroes and sheroes who started our cultural identities, cultural policies and cultural traditions. So part of our injury is an injury of identity, injury of culture. So that's an area that has to be addressed. Many of our young people do not know what it means to be African or be a person of African descent, other than what has been negatively shown to them through media, through societies, the lens of white America. And if some of you who are older may remember this famous test that was done by husband and wife psychologists in the 1950s, that's referred to as the doll test. And they were given these young children, 4 and 5 years old, a choice between a white doll and a black doll. And they would ask, you know, which doll is smarter? Always these young Black children would point to the white doll. Which doll is smarter? Always these young Black children, boy or girl, would point to the white doll. Which doll do you want to be? They would always grab the white doll. So we were able to see at 5 years of age, 4 and 5 years of age, we have already been inculcated with racist ideas about Black and whiteness in this country, and that we gave a severely negative assignment to Blackness. That test was replicated in I think 1999 by another young sister, some almost 50 years later, 40 some years later, and the same results. And so there's an injury to our identity that this country constantly perpetuates. And when we look at our music, the culture that we express, it solidifies and perpetuates that injury. And those artists who project Blackness in a negative fashion are the ones who are mostly awarded contracts by the systems of art expression in this country, whether it's record producers or actors or movies, studios or whatever. The final injury area is the criminal justice system. And, you know, from arrest to incarceration and lack of reform, lack of ability to reform, et cetera, lack of resources coming out, all of that has to be addressed in this country. So those are the 5 injury areas. And for the sake of time, I'm going to just talk briefly about repairs. So you have all these crimes. You have these 3 periods of crimes. You have these 3 categories of crimes, of genocide, plunder, and apartheid. You have these injuries that have resulted across all aspects of life for Black people in this country. And we know just with the science of transgeneration epigenetics, it's going to continue indefinitely in the future unless things are resources and plans, projects, proposals are inserted into the community at a level that it will do what? Repair those injuries that have resulted from the crimes. And so that is really the new framing of the reparations movement. Crimes were committed, injuries result, and repairs necessary. And there's no structure, there's no standard of repair in America. However, we go to the international community and we do have a standard of repair, standard of reparations, and that's loosely called full reparations. And full reparations is how do you get back to, how do you return the system back to where it was had not these injuries, had not these crimes been committed? And so the international community says 5 components. One is cessation and guarantees of non-repetition. First, you have to stop the crimes that they're continuing. You have to stop doing it. You have to end these apartheid laws that still exist. You have to end the racist discrimination and the systemic racism that still exists. And you have to put in place mechanisms that ensure that they don't continue. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is restitution. Putting in resources that return the people back to the way they would have been had not the crimes been committed. That's the education, that's the health, mostly education and the business and economic type of things that what I talked about. Then there's compensation. Compensation is a standard. It is one that's recognized under international law. If the other areas the other areas does not completely repair the situation. Then there's satisfaction. Satisfaction is about the dignity of people. And I talked about how the image of Blackness is so denigrated in this country that our dignity is one that we suffer from on a day-to-day basis. We suffer from having a positive outlook on who we are. How do you engage in satisfaction? Apologies, the rewriting of history, monuments, museums, those type of things internationally has been seen as how you address the issue of satisfaction. And then the final one is rehabilitation for the heart, mind, and spirit injury. Why do Black children want to kill themselves almost double at a rate that they did a year ago, 2 years ago? Why is there so much pain, emotional and mental pain in our communities? Those type of things have to be addressed under the issue of rehabilitation. So the new paradigm, the new framework on reparations is crimes, injuries, and repair. And I hope that I was able to share that in a way that is kind of easily understandable, and it's debatable also, but we think it's one that it came out of the World Conference Against Racism. It's one that is being globally accepted, and it's certainly one that we're fighting on today in America. In fact, we wrote those 5 components into the federal bill, HR 40, which we have a tremendous amount of action around in this country. So I'll stop there, and again, hopefully I was able to be educational. And if there's any questions, I will take them.
All right, Sam has got a question. Go ahead. Sam, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Go ahead and open it up to other questions.
Okay, we have another question here in the chat. Is there a new World Reparations Gathering planned, and when is it?
There's been talk about a reparations conference in I want to say, it slips my mind, the country in West Africa. However, I know that the MacArthur Foundation, who just recently gave 20 plus organizations grants to do work around reparations and healing, they're having a conference in August. That would be live stream. It's limited to probably about 100 attendees because of the budget, but it would be something that would be live streamed around the world in August.
Mr. Howard, do you have any estimates, for example, what it would cost in the United States to address reparations? In other words, what would the Congress have to, I'm speaking, there are other costs, of course, but what would be the costs in terms of the U.S. budget that would have to be passed by the Congress? Do you have any estimate of that, sir?
So there's $18 million only that's on the table right now, which is a minuscule amount of money for the federal government to do the commission, to people to commission and come up with the report with the comprehensive list of proposals. Each of those proposals would have a dollar amount. People who talk about the 12, 13, 14 trillion dollars, they talk about reparations as a check to every individual based on the amount that was extracted from our ancestors. That's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is to look at all the proposals, look at the injury that exists, look at the proposals that are developed to address those injuries, and look at what that would take, how long that would take, what would be the cost individually of each proposal, and come up with an aggregate number. Mm-hmm. What I do know, the cost of not paying reparations. Mm-hmm. And that is what a Bank of America, not Bank of America, but Citigroup report came out in 2020 that said that this country has foregone $15 trillion in not paying reparations. Mm-hmm. That they would have made, this country would have made it if they had paid reparations 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so the longer we put this out, the more where this country is not earning. And that if 10, 15 trillion dollars was applied to our reparations, it would come back in a 200% return. And I'm in business, and a 10% return is good for me on my money. And so we're talking about a 200% return on any reparations program. It makes no sense not to engage in reparations for this country. Mm-hmm. And this is a Citigroup. Citigroup is probably the second largest bank in America. Mm. And it's from their team of economists that came up with this report. And that's really what we're in COBRA is trying to pivot on, is what is the benefit to all of America by paying Black reparations? Mm-hmm. So Black people are not the only one who benefit. There's a aggregate benefit for the entire country.
Just on a much smaller scale, I think, for example, what could happen to the economy of Kansas City mm-hmm. if it would do the economic development in the core city.
That's right.
People, actively involved, fully involved in our economy. I mean, it would be extraordinary. And I can imagine at the national level, there would be those kinds of economic returns.
Exactly, Tex. Reverend.
Texas, fine.
Thank you.
Brother Kamm?
Uh-huh.
This is Reverend Mann. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The notion of reparations is so big. Do you have a starting spot?
The starting spot for me would definitely center around maybe two or three things. One would be retooling Black America to participate in the global economy, in the national economy. and that's an educational piece, but it's also one where government, where business would take a strong stand in that as well. That's one thing. And of course, with that is education. There has to be a focus on educating Black youth in a way, and educating all of America in a way that gives pride to people, to people's identity. So that's two. And then the third one is around health. We know that there's some things you can do that can reverse the transgenerational effect of historical trauma that will result in Blacks having a better quality of life. The last 10 years, you've had this onset of juvenile diabetes in the Black community. When you look in Black communities all around the country, you see these dialysis centers on every 10 blocks. There's a dialysis center. When you go to the Caribbean, where they don't have these technology and science of dialysis centers, you see, for the same reasons we have high diabetes rates in America, you see amputations in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so we know the historical trauma, the transgeneration, epigenetic inheritance is one that is across all Blacks who experienced the horrors of enslavement and apartheid coming out of that. So it just shows itself up differently. So I would say, we have to be able to feed our families. When you look at all of the crime in Chicago and elsewhere around the country, these young people can't feed their families. They're locked out of the labor force. They were not educated to be in a labor force. They can only engage, then they have to eat. They have to sleep. They have to have clothes. Just the basic, the baseline needs of food, shelter, and clothing. They can't do that legally in the formal economy because they're locked out. So the only place they can go is the informal economy. And the informal economy is not always illegal, but it's predominantly illegal. And to rise or to be successful in that economy, you have to be violent. And you have to be able to expense force and violence on people to make sure that they don't take what you're trying to take, because it's a take, type of existence. And
Brother
so it's
Kamm,
out of that economy, the formal economy, they're going to engage in the informal economy. Sorry.
Brother Kamm, I'm not surprised at this, and I have felt it my own self, but do we need something like, and this is a weak example, but something like they did at the end of World War II, the Marshall Plan?
Right, and that's what HR 40 is designed, a comprehensive package of proposals, a Marshall-like plan at the end of the commission. That's what we should have. And then the government, then we'd have to go and say, we want you to fund this totality of redress, over a number of years and over several budgets. So
the HR 40 does not include the actual funding of the plan.
No, the goal of HR 40 is to craft the proposals.
Wow.
Right. And then we still have to fight. And that's why local reparations is so important. And I tell people this all the time. If we were to get HR 40 passed in the next 3 or 4 months, it'll take about 6 months to people the commission, and the commission will be out 18 months. So we're looking at 2 years plus. And it comes back.
Is that what Evanston is doing?
No. Evanston's not doing HR 40. HR 40, I'm talking about the federal legislation.
No. I mean, is that the tack that Evanston is taking, the funding of the?
No, Evanston is funding their redress from marijuana taxes.
Okay, all right, that's what I was asking. Yeah,
and
right.
They haven't. Evanston has not. Evanston is doing it. Their model is different. So the HR 40 model is you create the commission, you fund the commission. Commission looks at all of that. It needs to look at, it crafts proposals Then after the proposals are crafted, then you fund the proposals. With Evanston, they developed a task force. They gave a specific dollar amount to the task force, and now the task force must determine, or the subcommittee must determine how that money is used. So HR 40 is, we want to get the proposals in place, then we talk about funding. Evanston, the funding is in place now, and they're attempting to develop how that is going to be targeted. But I was talking about HR 40, so we're talking 2 years plus. If there was some immediate law that was enacted to pass HR 40, we're talking about 2 years plus before the proposal comes down, the plan comes down. And then we have to go back to Congress and fight for the funding, which is another fight. That could take, several years or several Congresses. You don't even know. Some of the things might be implemented immediately. Others we may have to fight for a number of years. So we're talking 3 years plus before any redress comes down on the federal level, which makes local reparations so important because you can target certain things on the local level right now. You can't do everything that I talked about as far as full reparations. But in Chicago, we say, in my book, Synchronizing Local Reparations, we call that Reparations Triage, where you look at a community and you see what are the 1, 2, 3 areas where that community is in most need of resources, targeted resources as a result of the historic crimes committed against them, as a result of the injury, in-depth injury that it's experiencing. Where should some resources be targeted the most, and you apply those resources right now, in 6 months, in a year, and so forth. And so that's why local reparations is so important. There's a question about HR 40, the prospects of it. Right now, everybody knows that a bill to be passed into law has to be passed through both the House and the Senate. In the House, we have 195 co-sponsors. We have 197 co-sponsors. We have 20 other additional congresspersons who says, if the bill makes it to the floor, I'll sign it. So that's 217 yes votes. We need 218. So the bill sponsor would cast the 218 votes. We have the votes right now to pass HR 40 out of the House. The leadership of the House will not bring it to the floor for a vote, saying that it would hurt their chances of maintaining the House, control of the House in the midterm elections. So it's a political thing. Again, we know we were not going to get it passed in the Senate because in the House, you need a simple majority, 217 plus 1. There's 435 congresspersons. So, you split that down in the middle, it's 217, and 1 remainder. So you need 217 plus 1, 218. We have that. In the Senate, however, you need a supermajority. You need 60 votes. We're not going to get 10. We don't even have all the Democrats on the Senate bill. And so we're definitely not going to get 10 Republicans to sign over, because we have to keep in mind that this whole fight for reparations, in the eyes of those who see themselves as Republicans, they see it as a reminder that they lost the Civil War. And we had to look at it in that particular, in that lane, because they still wouldn't be flying the Confederate flags if they still didn't have an attachment to that particular ideology. And so they're not going to cross over to the side of redress. And that's why it's been predominantly a Democratic liberal type of issue. Mm-hmm. And so what we had intended to do was quickly pass this out of the House. It passed out of the Judiciary Committee last April. We wanted to quickly pass it out of the House, get it to the floor, pass it, and then ask the president to initiate it through an executive order, because we have the Senate leadership. We just can't get a Senate majority. We just can't get a Senate majority, but we have the Democratic Senate leadership that's on board. We pass it out of the House. Your party wants it, it would be good for the country, you pass it. So that's really where we're targeting at right now, is to get it to the president's desk and to encourage him to pass it.
I see the Reverend. Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Are you going to
say Ed Kyle has a question.
Yes, a significant or important part of the anti-apartheid work in South Africa was the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that my understanding is we're dealing with the traumatic experience of apartheid, moving toward accountability and restoration. Is that a significant part of what you're talking about in terms of the reparations movement here, or would that be more of a distraction? I could see maybe some potential for a local restoration effort, but does that mesh with what you're talking about on the national level?
So most of us in the movement see truth and reconciliation, that process, when we look at South Africa, is one that came before the repair. And the repair still hasn't came to South Africa. They're still fighting for the same things that they were, many of the same things economically that they were fighting for during the apartheid regime. So truth and reconciliation before repair is out of order. Certainly it's something that is within the HR 40 bill, but there's also a truth and reconciliation bill, truth, reconciliation, transformation bill that's being targeted by Barbara Lee, that's being sponsored by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. So we have Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's the lead sponsor on HR 40. Truth Commission is embedded in that bill. And then there's a Truth Commission bill resolution that's being championed by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. We're not against truth and reconciliation, but again, our feeling is, and COBRA's feeling is out of order. You cannot have truth and reconciliation before repair.
Mm-hmm.
And history is showing us that.
Matt, Reverend Holzendorf had a question earlier.
Good evening, and thank you, Kamm. This is really great information. You answered part of what I was wondering about, and that is the resistance to doing the right thing by us. Chattel slavery was in fact legal in the United States of America. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, how do we deal with those who are so resistant to doing the right thing by us? They seemingly don't have a problem with other groups, but with us, they have a problem. And I don't know how do we work around, how do we get around that?
So some of those, people we're not going to get, just simply not going to get. We have to really just dig deeper into this community of America that wants to see right done, irrespective of political party, irrespective of, whose side you were on, your family side was on in the Civil War we talked about right now, and what's best for America, all of Americans. Again, I state America will be enriched. Conservative America, liberal America, Republican Americans, Black Americans, Democrat Americans, independent Americans, all will be enriched if what is old and due, Black Americans are engaged. And so we know, like in the South, some white people would rather die than take a blood transfusion from a Black person because of their inherent racist. We have plenty of anecdotes like that, even though our women nurse their babies. So it's just a total insane contradiction when it comes to some people seeing any benefit to Black people as beneficial to them. But again, the data, the economic data is showing emphatically, undeniably, that reparations to Black people will benefit their country at an enormous rate, add 0.3 to the GDP every year, which is a significant increase to the GDP. And so we just have to make that argument more pronounced. And the people who will act logically, they will act logically. And there's people who will remain irrational, they'll remain irrational. We just have to just speak to those who are logical.
Do you see that there may come a time when a direct action would become necessary? And I don't know what that would look like, but I think we as a people, we've got a voice, and I don't know the best way for us to come together right now to let everybody in this country know, because my great grandmothers were enslaved persons. I have their slave papers. So, and you know, we paid a lot of dues. So Kamm, I don't know a direct action on Washington or local legislature. I don't know. I mean, but if this is that, and it is political, how do we break that? You know.
Yeah, I think what we're gearing up is for direct action at the White House to get the president to pass HR 40. I think that's what it's going to take. And we're allowing some backdoor type of negotiations. Congressman Hoyer stated that he would urge the president to address it. He said that in April of last year, and don't know if he's taken it to the president. James Clyburn, who has a direct line into the White House, who's a majority whip, a Black congressman out of South Carolina. He says he will engage the president. So that it remains, they're doing this backdoor policy, but that may not work in time for us. So we had to be geared up for some direct action.
Well, I thank you. I know all of us appreciate you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I'm 83, I'll soon be 84, but Kamm, I'm ready for whatever we need to do. I've been on this for a long time.
Thank you. And you know, yeah, we have to look to our elders for that commitment, for the spirit of staying with it, you know. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where might we follow or learn more about what you're doing and keeping up with the work that you're doing?
So you can go to incobraonline.org. You can also go to ibw21.org. They have a reparations resource center that everything that's public, every news article daily, weekly that comes out on reparations, they're posting that on their website. So you can go there, and their resource center is one of the best in the world, actually, around reparations information. There was a question about Missouri. How does Missouri Congress people look? In Missouri, we only have 2 co-sponsors, Emmanuel Cleaver and Representative Cori Bush. And in Kansas, let me see, in Kansas, there's another question while I'm looking at Kansas.
Just where can we find the list, essentially, of who's supportive and who's not supportive is the question.
Yeah, so I don't see any congresspersons in Kansas that is signed on in the state of Kansas. But in the state of Missouri, just the 2. Let me see.
Kamm?
Yes, I'm here.
How about Sharice Davis?
Sharice Davis. Was she just recently elected?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she is. Let me see. Let me do this in alphabetical order.
Sam, this is Mickey. I can say that she is not a co-sponsor. She is a target because of her background and some of the history and some of the work that she's done, particularly in Native communities. But I think, Kamm, I don't think there's anybody that's a co-sponsor from Kansas at this time.
Yeah, I didn't see anyone in Kansas as I'm looking at the site. So Sharice Davis is not. You're absolutely right, Mickey. Thank you. Mickey, sorry, thank you. So you all have work to do.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Mr. Howard, we are out of time, and we probably need to draw this to a close to keep faith with you as well as the others. I want to thank you quite sincerely for this presentation. We have Mr. Mickey Dean coming up next week to talk with us more locally about these issues, and I certainly want to remind everyone of that and urge you to be in attendance. But I want to thank you profoundly, Mr. Howard, for your time with us today.